Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, happy Friday. Welcome to Faculty Corner. I'm Maggie Evans. Together with Shobha Subramanian, we comprise the Career and Professional Development team in the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies. I'm delighted to host three really outstanding scientists for this Faculty Corner focused on how Chalk Talks are evaluated. If you weren't able to attend the first part of this two-part series by Dr. Evan Snitkin, his video is available on our YouTube channel. You can just go to YouTube and search for Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies. You'll be able to watch that. This one will also be filmed, so you'll be able to refer back to this in the future. We also have a lot of other Faculty Corners videotaped and available on our YouTube channel as well. So today, I'm happy to welcome Dr. Kristen Verhey. She is a Kent Christensen Collegiate Professor in the Department of Cell and Developmental Biology and Biophysics. Dr. Mary O'Riordan. She is a Frederick Neidhart Collegiate Professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology, and she is also our Associate Dean of Graduate Studies. And this session will be moderated today by Dr. Renee Bowie, who is an outstanding postdoctoral fellow in the Life Sciences Institute. So I'm going to hand this over to Renee. Take it away.
Okay, so today, as Maggie mentioned, we're going to be kind of trying to focus a little bit more on the evaluation process of Chalk Talks and kind of like how it fits into the overall academic interview. So then, I'll have you start out and just kind of give a brief introduction, kind of like how long you've been at U of M, and also kind of like talk a little bit about how many search committees you've been on, and kind of like how the Chalk Talk fits into the whole interview process.
I think I've been here 16 years. And well, you didn't warn me about this. I'd have to count. I'm going to guess I've been on half a dozen search committees. Actually, my first search committee was my first year here, and so that was pretty strange. And when they asked me to do it, I said, I can't do that. I just was on the other side of the coin. But they said, well, we need your expertise, and so anyway. So yeah, maybe half a dozen, I don't know. And I chaired a couple, and I'm chairing one now. I think the Chalk Talk is, I mean, all the aspects of the interview are important, but the Chalk Talk is definitely important in the sense that it's really an opportunity for us to evaluate you in a more informal presentation setting. So, you know, we're all give talks about our research and practice that, but then when you do the Chalk Talk, it's a little more, it's kind of like your prelim, right? Like you just are not sure what's going to come at you. So it really, in that sense, gives the evaluators a sense to see sort of how you think on your feet, how you react to questions, you know, how good are you at explaining the big question versus the details. And these are all things that become important in, you know, your research, your teaching, how well we think you're going to work with us on committees, you know, all those kinds of things. So it is a very important part of the interview.
Yeah, I think I've been here about the same time as Kristen, so I've been here for 15 years, and I've probably been on 7 or 8 search committees, and so heard lots of Chalk Talks there. And I think additionally, Kristen and I have both served on the Biological Scholars Selection Committee, and so I've heard lots of Chalk Talks in many different disciplines, besides just the committees that I've been on, and that's been really illuminating. So it's definitely an important part of the interview, and part of what we're trying to look for in addition to all the factors that Kristen mentioned is, you know, really what you're going to be like as a colleague. Is it fun to talk science with you? You know, how do you think, where are your ideas going? Because I think from any set body of work that's been published for which you're bringing people in to give talks, you know, the research could go in lots of different directions. And, you know, really trying to think about that intellectually and couple that to how you'd structure projects for students and postdocs, I think can give you some insight into how these future colleagues might think.
All right, so we have like a list of questions that people have submitted, but usually now we kind of open it up to general questions, and then as we need, we can kind of like refer back to the posted questions. So if you guys have questions and kind of the Chalk Talk process and how specifically they're evaluated. We'll open it up to the audience.
I was wondering if you have a formal rubric that you use with metrics that you score, or if it's more subjective and leaning towards is it fun to talk science with you?
I've never been on a committee that had a formal rubric.
I was about to say, I like your rigorous thinking.
Yes.
That's more rigorous than.
I think that would be great
Yeah.
if somebody took the time to come up with something. But it is much more, soft in
Yeah.
that.
I mean, I think it's specifically evaluating that when we fill out evaluations on candidates, I mean, that's usually a section that feedback is solicited on, but I don't think we're necessarily looking at a rubric. And I think because, they can be really quite different because they are much less structured. And so, so sometimes, I think having some space to let, the candidates drive the conversation might make that a little bit difficult, but it's a good idea to think about.
Kind of follow up on that. So when you write these evaluations, feedback, are they like generic comments, or could you just talk a little bit about how you write the evaluation?
Yeah, usually you get a form with a couple questions. How did you think the seminar went? How did you think the Chalk Talk went? Did you meet one-on-one? If so, how did it go? Did you go have a dinner or something with candidate? How did that go? It's pretty open-ended. So most people write, a few sentences, maybe half a dozen sentences or something. I thought the Chalk Talk went well. I thought the person handled the questions well on their feet. I thought they were respectful. I liked the big vision, but I could see, or I liked the project they described, but I could see the longer term vision. Those kinds of things are what people would write.
And that's also a place, of course, obviously by the time you're inviting people to come and interview, you've got a pretty strong list of candidates. So besides all of the good things, I mean, there you're looking for red flags, right? So, in the perfect world, you hear somebody that's just got all of the things that Kristen said, and sometimes the answer is, during the Chalk Talk, this person got really combative and, argumentative in a discussion about, what models they would use. And, usually the problem is not that, okay, it's not really up to me what models they use, that's not the point. But, as you're having a discussion, the person, really has a difficult time, thinking about feedback or new ideas, and, that generates some concern. So, that's where sometimes these things evolve in the evaluations. Just all these things were really great. This caused me some concern.
Other questions?
So of all the factors employed in recruiting a potential future colleague, to what extent Chalk Talk evaluation determines the potential recruitment? Is it 5% of the overall process, or, to what extent does it really affect? Because since the setting is informal, you said, right?
Yeah.
So
I'd say it plays a huge part. I've seen candidates come in where the talk was really great, very polished and everything explained. Even somebody outside the field could sort of follow the line of reasoning and grasp sort of the impact of the work. And then your one-on-one interaction was also very good, and then things just fell apart in the Chalk Talk for one reason or the other. And then that candidate usually doesn't rise to the top in the end. So it's really important. I hope that answers your question.
But I think also I would say, I wouldn't quantify in that way. I would say,
Right.
all of those things are important. So the thing is, like, and it's not so much like we're quantifying as, okay, 30%
Right.
was the Chalk Talk and it was really good. You're looking for red flags, and it's not that easy to quantify. And so when you look at all the candidates, compared to each other, right, who had the least red flags and who had the most obvious strengths? And, this can be kind of a really sort of broad array of skills, attributes, potential collaborations, other things that they bring to the department. But one red flag, whether it's in the seminar, whether it's in the Chalk Talk or one-on-ones, all those things are accounted for, and this can include lunch with students,
Yeah.
right? Some of the students are like, hey, this person really seemed to not care at all about teaching, and we're kind of concerned about that. So all of those things are important. So this is just one, but meaning just because it's informal, you don't think that it's not also being really stringently evaluated.
When you say that the Chalk Talk is falling apart, what do you exactly mean?
Falling apart. So, some of the things that Mary mentioned earlier, maybe being very combative. Someone said, I don't understand why that's important. Someone says, I don't understand why you want to use that model system. Can you explain to me where you think this is going to go? And well, you obviously don't understand. Just very combative or argumentative. Or, I've way overambitious. 3 huge projects that would take 3 labs, 20 years each to figure out, kind of thing. And when you try to say, wow, that seems like a lot of work. Oh, I can do it all, but without a sense of reality of, okay, yeah, maybe you, if you cloned yourself 3 times, could do it all, but you're going to have beginning grad students and postdocs in your lab doing the work, and you're going to have to mentor them to be successful here. So just those kinds of things, or way too much in the details, and not really conveying the impact and the importance of the work.
Just pretty much grandiosity, bad interpersonal skills, and, well, paranoia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
grandiosity is not the right way to come off. I completely agree with that. The other thing that I'll add, so I've definitely seen all of those things and they're not good. The other thing I would say is I think because it is really an informal discussion, but on the other hand, this is an area in which you should really be an expert. So things that you propose to do, not only should you really think about what a realistic portfolio looks like Kristen was saying, but you have to really rationalize in conversation why you've sort of chosen those paths. And for example, again, if you're going to say, well, I'm really interested in using this sort of model system, this transgenic mouse, as a way to understand more about this disease, and someone says, well, that model's actually been quite controversial for the following reasons. The good answer isn't, oh, I didn't know. Because you're just saying that you're going to sort of develop your research program. There's different answers to that, right? There's always something unexpected that's going to come up in conversations and interviews. So you have to actually expect that and learn how to react to that. And there's thoughtful ways to react to that, just to say, well, this isn't the perfect model, but it has these advantages, and I'm certainly open to employing other models as well. But really just to say, well, I thought I'd throw this out there at you, and then go, oh, I didn't realize actually some people thought this was not very good. And so I think those are the things that sometimes tend to come out when people haven't put the sort of level of thought in there that they did for their nice seminar and those things. That does tend to come out. And to know that that's actually part of what the Chalk Talk's about in the interview, right? To really kind of push a little further into your thinking and try to understand, how you're going to achieve your goals. And you want to make sure that you show that you've thought that through pretty deeply.
Other questions?
So in the first part, he spoke about, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but he spoke about doing a chalkboard talk and not a presentation. What are your thoughts on that? That's great.
It's going to depend on the department, and you should have the opportunity to either ask your faculty host or the department chair sort of how they would like to see the Chalk Talk, whether you have an opportunity to PowerPoint, they want a 10-minute introduction, or whether it really is all on the chalkboard or whiteboard. But you should be prepared to be writing on the board. And so you should definitely practice beforehand, like Evan said, and you may not be the best artist and good at drawing things, but you need to be able to convey the overall question and your approaches and the kind of experiments you're going to do on a chalkboard. And so you should practice. You should kind of have an outline of what you want the final chalkboard to look like. Right, I'm going to ask this question and this one, and these are the kinds of things I'm going to write down, have some keywords ready. And this also is a way for people to evaluate your ability to teach. So that is always in the back of people's minds as they're watching you up there on the board.
I think, what's really cool about it, although it's a good thing to think about, where we get this experience, we don't practice this enough to actually be able to sort of articulate in some kind of schematic form your thought process. When I think back to my Chalk Talk, which I think probably in retrospect was kind of not all that exciting, because I wrote out this detailed outline of what I thought my R01 would be on the board, and that's okay, but it's just that's, I think I misunderstood, really what the purpose was, and, because that's, nobody's oh, an AIM 2C, you sound that's not really what they're doing. But to actually have an outline that allows you to lead people through the logic, I think is really helpful. And I think that not only does it give an indication, of teaching, but I think it really helps you to captivate people's interest, and to share your vision in a way that, you're constrained by when you give your talk, right? So I think that, there's really a great opportunity there to interact with people in a way that, a seminar kind of constrains. And so it's really nice to have that, and it gives you a lot of, there's just, I think, more energy in a really good chalk talk. I mean, you're really interacting with people, you can go talk to people, and the one thing I will say that people don't always do, and you don't have to do this, but I think a nice thing about coming, if you can, a few minutes early and just drawing out some basic idea of what you want to cover on the board is that you also should take the opportunity to control the room. One of the things I know is that sometimes people, lots of questions get fired at you and you're trying to answer everybody's questions, and after a while you realize that you're 40 minutes into it and you kind of only got through half of what you thought was going to be aim 1, and you're like, but I didn't get to talk about my whole thing. I had this really cool stuff in aim 3 and we didn't even get there. Well, that's up to you. I mean, you're in control. Everybody's like, well, people just kept asking questions. Well, you can say, hey, these are really great questions. I've got a couple more aims. Do you guys want to keep talking about this one, or should we move on and then come back to this, right? So that's also part of it. How do you teach? How do you interact? How do you kind of, really shepherd the discussion in a way that kind of achieves your goals? And so it is kind of helpful, I think, to have some things written up. I think PowerPoint usually, although it's not always disallowed, usually it's not what people want, because they want to see you in action.
I've seen people bring a piece of paper, a handout for everyone, just one page, no more than one page, and with like a graphical abstract, like you'd see in a cell press journal kind of thing, just to help people, or maybe a list of 3 questions you're going to address, broad questions, and then you can have those same 3 written on the board and kind of go through them each, how you see the aims of a grant based on that question, just to help people remember what is the big picture. Or if if it's too complicated to draw out, kind of thing.
You had a question back?
Yeah, so for some departments, they just have open searches, and it's not really a specific field. So how do you as a committee evaluate if you have, say, 3 candidates that are just wildly different in fields?
Yeah, I think that's where it comes down to the person as everything as a whole, right? So, I mean, if you think about that, the university is going to invest millions of dollars in you, right? And so the question is, who's the best bet for our money? And that, so when we put you up for tenure, there are 3 things you're going to be evaluated on: scholarship, teaching, and service. And so in one chalk talk, we're trying to figure out how all those things are going to look 7 years from now or 6 years from now. Is your scholarship impactful and important, and are you going to have project, at a large level, but at a granular level, are these projects that students are going to be able to accomplish, and you're going to get publications, and are you going to be able to get funding on this? Are you going to be able to teach in our courses and get good evaluations so that when we go up for tenure, we're not having to explain why you have bad evaluations? Are you going to be a good committee member, a good member of the department that, if I ask you to chair this committee, am I going to have to be running after you every week? Have you had a committee meeting? Have you done it? What is your committee doing? Or are you just going to take it and do it? And are you somebody that I'm going to want to interact with? And are you going to help me think about my science in a new way? So all these things kind of come together, especially when you have candidates with such different research areas, which is almost usually the case.
Yeah, not much to add. That's exactly right.
Other questions? Yeah.
So how much do you care the balance between sort of independence and your own research and the possibilities to collaborate with the people being there evaluating you?
I think that's a tough one to answer because it depends on the department that you're going into. Some really want to build in certain areas, and so really want you to be able to collaborate. Or they may have a hole in some area that they want to fill. Others just want, interesting work and people who like to discuss science and come up with good ideas and help me to think differently about my own work. I think I would say it depends.
It does, and I think the unfortunate thing as a candidate, you don't always know which one of those things is operating, regardless of what the ad says. And it may even be that, some people on the committee want, oh, we really needed this person, and someone else is like, no, we really needed that person. You don't have any way to know that. And so, I would err on the side of, really thinking about how you can engage people, not only in getting excited about your work, but how to make them imagine their work differently. So, when somebody, face it, we're all like really kind of deeply interested and invested in our own science. And so when somebody else comes and they're doing something really new and exciting, I'm like, hey, that's cool. So, ideally you want to be able to make clear, oh, there are some very obvious nodes of collaboration between myself and, so-and-so and so-and-so. But this work actually is very broad and could impact, the work of many different people. And so make that easy for people to understand. And so just making sure that, you are framing your questions really broadly. And of course, these days it's really easy to know, right? You look at a web page and you're like, oh, I see people doing this, this, and this. It's easy for me to imagine. Who knows if these things will ever actually happen? It doesn't really matter. But just to say, I love it when people come and interview and I'm just like, wow, this person could really change how I'm thinking about the work I'm doing. That's cool.
Other questions?
Do you have some favorite questions that you like to ask candidates, or is it really just focused more on the aims and getting into that?
Yeah, for me, it's more organic. Like, once I see sort of what they're proposing, then it becomes more of a conversation of where do you see that going, how do you see that impacting your field, and how do you see grad students and postdocs being engaged in your work, kind of thing. I don't have a set of questions.
I don't either, and it's probably gonna make some of you cringe, but in the best way, it's like it's a lot like what a really good committee meeting should be like, right? Where you're just like, oh, here's some cool stuff I'm doing, and people are asking you questions because they're really interested, and they're like, have you thought about this? And you're like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And so it really is meant to be an exciting conversation. And so, you want to really foster that. And I think that part where it gets difficult, just like committee meetings that are sometimes harder, you're like, why did you do that? And you're like, oh, because somebody gave me these reagents. And people are like, well, that's not so great. So, really, I know it seems, like a lot of sort of check boxes, but a lot of the things that you train for as a graduate student really are to prepare you for that, to stand up there, to talk about your work, to really kind of control where you want your research to go, and to solicit feedback and information, from the people in the room. Mm-hmm. So, that's what it should be like. So when you think about, if any of you are students, I know some of you are, in committee meetings, that's the environment that you want to foster. And if people ask you hard questions, good. That's what you want to hear. And so that's a great way to prepare for Chalk Talks, actually, when you think about it.
So how much do you have to stick to what you proposed in the Chalk Talk in your actual research later? And is it more of an example of this is what I could do, or is it, because a lot of times, it depends on who you can collaborate with, which data you can get and all of that.
Yeah, nobody's writing this stuff down, or at least I'm not. Maybe Kristen's going to say differently, but I think, it's not so much the people in the room that are going to constrain what you're doing. You're proposing your stuff in your Chalk Talk based on the data and the work, that are preceding you starting your own lab. And so, it's not everybody else that's constrained, it's your data and what you're able to do. So, if your data completely changed between the time you give the Chalk Talk and then when you start your dive, you're like, wow, I have all this exciting new stuff. Yeah, nobody's going to worry about that. That's my thought anyway.
Yeah, I think, in the Chalk Talk, it's more a chance to see how you think. What is your vision? How do you think about problems and come up with approaches to answer those questions? And so if you took a different actual scientific path, but you still have the same overall way of thinking and approaching things and asking questions and designing experiments, I think that's really what should come out in the Chalk Talk.
Other questions?
Yeah. So what's the relationship between the Chalk Talk and your research statement? Is that basically you're presenting that?
Usually.
Beyond that, or?
Yeah, it's nice if it's just like in your research statement, you want to have some obvious, doable aims, maybe your first R1, maybe 3 to 5 years of work that, it's obvious that students are going to be able to do this work. You're going to get papers out. This is going to be attractive to funding agencies. But then you want to have some more longer term kind of things, a bigger picture, like maybe this, either a second project that arose from your postdoc work, but you're going to pursue this one first. Or maybe what you're proposing could lead in a couple different directions, and so here's an example of where I would go after that, sort of bigger, long-term kind of thing.
And the other thing I would say, so yes, definitely should reflect what you're talking about in your research plan, but there's an opportunity here that I don't know if Evan mentioned or if it was relevant for him, but when you're giving your job seminar, obviously you're not necessarily going to talk about everything that you did in your postdoc. Sometimes you're trying to say, well, these things hung together and there's all this other stuff that was cool, but it didn't really fit in the story, or there just was not enough time. And you want to make sure that if it's relevant for your future research, say, hey, this is a good time for me to just really mention some of the other interesting avenues of my work that are going to lay the foundation for my independent research that I didn't have time to talk about. So it's not a data presentation, but just to say, this kind of really adds to all the cool stuff I told you about, in my seminar. So yeah, so I mean, you have some flexibility, but it definitely should be based on what you wrote in your research plan.
I think it would raise red flags if it wasn't.
And then I had a question. So kind of after the chalk talk, is there a good way for the candidate to kind of get some feedback on their chalk talk and kind of like how to solicit that feedback? Or is it usually just like a yes or no and moving forward in the interview process?
There usually isn't a formal way for the candidate to get feedback. I think it depends. You usually have a faculty host, and so you could approach them and say, I'd love to get some feedback from you on the chalk talk. That would probably be viewed very positively.
I think you could do that, although I'll say that my guess is, especially during an active job search process, people might be reluctant to give feedback, and I'm not sure if it would be appropriate during the search process, just because there are other candidates. And so, I would say the way that you really want to get feedback is to actually do several, just like your actual seminar, to do several chalk talks. I'm really not kidding. I mean, I've seen some fantastic postdocs from our department, get ready. And I mean, they were so good, but their first chalk talk, because you haven't really done much like it, you're nervous, you're not sure what to expect, you're not really kind of sure how the conversation's going to go. It's really, really helpful to do a few practice talks and get faculty from your department that are going to ask you the hard questions. That's what you want, so that you can kind of get a sense of how it's going to go. So yeah, so that's the time to get the feedback. Yeah.
Do we have other questions from the audience?
Yeah. So, how the content of your proposal, your research proposal, is evaluated in comparison with your postdoctoral research? You want to find a close link with it, or you can be creative and start a new line of research. What are you looking for?
For most people, it arises from their postdoctoral research. I can't think of any candidates I've seen where the proposed research proposal wasn't kind of directly related. So I'm not sure what people would think of that.
Well, there's, for example, people that come from industry, you cannot disclose your research, things like that, right? I myself have done several contracts with pharmaceutical companies. I cannot disclose my research. So, those are hard topics to cover, so how you would approach.
I mean, obviously in that case, that's kind of a special case. But I have to say, I think the challenge there would be the concern that if you weren't able to share your research as a foundation to build on, that it would be difficult to actually get funding if you couldn't share your data for the same reason. And I think that would be a cause for concern. So it's not so much saying, it's not that these ideas aren't really great. It's just that, the question is like, how long would it take to build up sufficient foundational data that the projects could be funded? So I think that would be the issue.
It is in the part that you can disclose.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, I think it's fair to say, especially if you're in that unusual circumstance, that people can understand why that might be. If you had at least some data, maybe not the bulk of data that you could share compared to other candidates, but just at least some data to say, yes, this is why I'm moving off in a completely different direction, but just to have at least some foundation for it, I think that would be important, but then still understandable.
Yeah, so what I think about is, when you talk about what you did during your postdoc, you cannot share all of it.
Yeah.
So.
Other questions?
I was just considering the contents to propose in the chalk talk. What if someone already have the care word? So how various in the the folks from the different from the CAT award, what the expectation should be, would present brand new, or it's kind of over something.
I mean, usually when you have the K99 and R00 parts, so I think people would expect you to present the R00 portion of your work, which really would be leading to the equivalent of an R01, right? So they would want to see sort of what is your first major grant from your lab, your independent position going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, the way I've seen this done really beautifully is in that particular scenario is one of the postdocs from our department who had a K99, and actually, because the R00 part was essentially already funded, she actually just wrote it out on the board and said, so this is kind of, a body of work that's been proposed and funded, so we're going to do that. But let me take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about this related and second line of research that I would use as the basis for a separate, grant proposal and would, generate projects in my lab. So, I think there's different ways to approach it. I mean, I think the good part is if you're already funded to do the R00, I mean, it's kind of a vetted, project. But I do think that then that's a wonderful opportunity to show a little bit more creativity, because you can already say, yeah, this I already have funding to do this. Here are some things I'd like to now stretch to do. To do in my own lab. So yeah, so I think that's a great position to be in.
Are you looking for next R1 content?
Roughly. Yeah, I mean, I think people want to see the outline of that project. Like, again, don't propose, 30 years of work, but really think what the next chunk of, the next few years, next 5 years looks like.
Yeah. You sort of mentioned doing a practice talk before you go into the interview. That's sort of at the end of your postdoc. So what sort of practice would you recommend throughout your postdoc to kind of lead up to that practice interview question?
So I think there are some different ways to do this. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong. I mean, we probably don't take enough opportunities to do this, but you could definitely ask, your mentor within a lab meeting, could you actually, whether it's for the job talk or not, I mean, just to say, hey, I'm envisioning kind of an outline for the rest of my project. Can I actually do, instead of doing a PowerPoint presentation of my lab meeting, can I just, do a chalk talk on the board and actually talk through? So actually, at least in micro, the faculty actually do this for the grant proposals. So we have, just like what we call faculty research conference, and once a month, anybody can sign up and say, hey, I'm going to submit a grant, for the next cycle. Here's my specific aims. I'm going to talk through this with you guys now, throw some questions at me. So we've actually started doing that. It's just a great way to have people kind of vet and stress test our ideas, and there's no reason why you guys can't do that too. I think the thing that seems hard is, people are going to, I mean, the whole point is to have people ask you hard questions, and so it seems a little intimidating, but better to hear from your colleagues than from, anonymous reviewers. And so, ask for it, like just, or just, get a bunch of really smart postdocs like the people in this room and say, hey guys, I'd really kind of like to think through this. Can anybody come up, bring some donuts and, ask me some hard questions. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I think if you're writing a fellowship, you can sort of have a chalk talk for your fellowship, sort of showing the aims and then having people give you feedback and talk through, have you really thought about this aspect? Are you really going to be able to answer that question using this approach? Those kinds of things. But then, your lab meetings are also, you can view those as opportunities to practice this kind of thing, because, you're presenting your data, but people are asking you, but how can have you done the right control? Are you sure? Have you thought about doing it this way? I mean, those are the kind of questions that, give you good practice in these kinds of things, be able to think on your feet and consider alternative explanations kind of thing.
And I'll just say, to add to that, if you're going to do this in lab meeting, I think we're all used to, people are like, oh, here's my data, here's what I think. But sometimes, when I want to do that, I really explicitly invite people to say, I'm really trying to think about some new, different ways to approach this problem. So I might even propose some crazy things, and I want you guys to really pull this apart, because sometimes people are just kind of going along the way they always go along, and so if you really want, some additional feedback, I usually invite people to do that at the beginning, just so that they really have their thinking cap on.
So the K99 R00 is specifically designed for transition. Talking to a few people, it seems like if you have another K, you can also and it usually allows you to take it with you to your faculty institution. How does that weigh against like K99? Have you seen it? What are your thoughts on that? Is there any difference if I come in with like a different K99 and K99?
I think any funding that you bring with you is much appreciated by your new institution.
Not necessarily, just definitely a plus.
Yeah.
So I don't know where to ask this, but I think that's something nice to address. So how is they evaluated during the faculty search? I mean, there is any space at a given point in which you are evaluated, even if you are a minority, or I don't know, some people have also handicap or special requirements, how that is evaluated. The faculty search will have any weight or where you should disclose it. It's recommended that you disclose it. How, I guess that yes, because you have support with people in your department, so how that will play a role in recruitment.
You're asking how to disclose, how or when to disclose something like a disability?
For example, yes.
I think I would wait till the second visit, because the first visit is really for them to get a feeling for you and would you fit, and likewise, do you like the department? Are these people you could work with for the next several decades, for example? So I mean, it really is a two-way street, right? You're evaluating the department as much as they're evaluating you. Your evaluation usually comes more in the second visit, but that's when you can bring up issues that might affect your abilities to work with the people in the department and might require some special circumstances, I guess.
Okay.
Just, it's sort of like family issues, don't bring those up the first time,
Yeah, that's
because it shouldn't be
close.
Nothing, nothing ever has to be disclosed other than, I mean, anything that's going to impact your...
So you certainly are not required to disclose anything. I feel ambivalent about this because I sort of feel like, in a way, we want to reach for, a really kind of broad representation of candidates, and, obviously the broadest look is early, right? By the time you get to the second interview, you're down to 1 or 2 people. And so, just to take your example, if you had a disability, I mean, I want to really be able to evaluate that. For example, if you just say, okay, well, you had this many papers and this candidate had more papers, but this person was really working with a significant challenge and overcame that, to still do incredibly well. But if I'm not given that information, which again, you are not required to disclose, but then I also, as part of the committee, can't take that into account when I'm evaluating. So I think there are a lot of reasons for, that Kristen mentioned, that it's better to just have them look at the science. But yeah, sometimes I feel like we just have to kind of get these things out there and actually really try to evaluate holistically. And I think committees really want to do that. The one issue that sometimes is good to hang on to is whether or not, but actually even I'm going to be ambivalent about that too, is whether or not your spouse or partner might be looking for a position. A lot of people understandably might wait until the second interview, but I will tell you that Michigan works very hard to try to recruit partners, and sometimes that takes a while, especially if you have a partner that has a relatively high level position in some sector. Those jobs don't just appear like that, and there are times when we have not been able to recruit people because they didn't tell us until the second visit, which again, they have every right to do. But that we were not able to mobilize quickly enough to make their partner some kind of arrangement. Mm-hmm. And another university could, because they were in a different place or they just had that. Mm-hmm. So there's not a right or a wrong answer. I mean, you have to have some comfort level with what you're willing to talk about and disclose about yourself. So.
Yes. Just related to that, sorry. So women,
Mm-hmm.
both are very nice to have children. Mm-hmm. So
the
same way, it's evaluated.
It's not a man or a woman thing.
Well, it shouldn't, right? But it shouldn't. I come from a background in which, it's happened more because impact to women, right?
Yeah.
So, but I agree with you, yes. So, how this plays a role, right? When you have children and you're in your early years and perhaps affect your productivity as well. I have seen many postdocs that have or require additional time to take care of the family, and your productivity is soared. So you address it in the same way. How is that evaluated? How you can be compared with other candidate that has no family for it, no children yet, or to make it fair, right?
Yeah, I mean, these are the issues that are really difficult, and it's not just scientists that struggle with this. People in every sector struggle with how do you weigh all these things, and when if you're interviewing for a job, when do you disclose these kinds of things? There's no easy right or wrong answer. It's all shades of gray. But I think most people understand that it's not a man-woman thing, because so Ryan Baldridge, who a couple of years ago got a job in biological chemistry, has 3 children, 3 young children. And so it's just as difficult for him as it is for a woman with 3 young children. So, and he disclosed it early, and that was his choice. I don't know, it's difficult.
Yeah, so it is, but let me just put it another way to you. So again, always your choice to disclose, but when you don't, if it's because you had young children, or you were taking care of elderly parents, or you had some kind of health-related issue, when you don't disclose that and that's affected your productivity, all I get to see on the committee is this was the productivity. So in my head, I have to kind of come up with a story about that, right? And so if there's a gap there, people fill it with you have no control over what. Or you can say, in spite of the fact that, I had 2 young children, I was taking care of elderly parents, I was still able to make really great progress, publish high impact work. And so, in some ways, that gap is there. And so you can choose to fill it or not choose to fill it if you're worried about how it affected your productivity. And so, I think that's the tough choice to make, and there's not a right answer. So at some level, you have to decide what you feel comfortable with. But what I would say is, people are always trying to figure out what your backstory is anyway, and so you might as well just give them the right information. And the other thing just to say about that is, if people are going to fill the gap with something that is not favorable, like, wow, this person wasn't productive, or even if you said, well, I had 2 children, they said she should have been able to do that anyway, is that the place you want to go?
No.
So I would say that, yeah, if it's a problem, you can't ever say it won't be a problem, hopefully in most institutions, and I think, ours is really thoughtful in that way. We know people have families, men and women have children, and, I think that you want to go to a place that can understand and evaluate that whole candidate.
We had 2 questions back.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I've just filled out like 40 faculty applications, and so most of them have voluntary information. So you can disclose if you have a disability, you can disclose your nationality, you can disclose your gender. It's not required, but a lot of, if those are something that you want to disclose, then they pretty much have them. But my question related to Chalk Talks is, so I, in full disclosure, I just went on a faculty interview, and I was giving my Chalk Talk, and some people were super engaged, and they asked a lot of questions, and then I did lose some people. So how was that evaluated? And they were people that were way out of my field, and I was having this difficulty striking a balance of being really technical, showing my competence, versus getting somebody in another field excited. So how was that evaluated? Do you just accept the fact that sometimes you're not going to understand the science of someone, or does the committee expect you to sort of reach everyone in the room?
I mean, my sense is if they've invited you at this point, I'd worry less about establishing technical competence. I mean, obviously you don't want to kind of fall down on understanding something really critical to your work.
Yeah.
But I think, first of all, there's no room in which you're going to reach everybody. So if a lot of people were engaged, that's great, And I think the part where you want to at least think about for future things, and you may have done this already, is at least start with the broad umbrella of, here's my big question. And I think hopefully most people should be able to kind of get into that. And then, of course, the people who are doing more closely related work are always going to be more engaged, and I think it's going to be that way in every department. So.
Yeah, I think as long as you got them at the beginning of the interesting question and the impact of the work, and they got lost in the details, that happens to me all the time. Okay. If somebody gives a talk on Drosophila, and I understand, okay, you're going to look at, this process because this is a great model system for this, and you've got all these tools and blah, blah, blah. And then they get into a couple genetic crosses, and I do not get genetic crosses, and I'm completely lost. What cell are you looking, how can you, I just leave it to my colleagues to say, yeah, she's got the experimental part down. She's going to be able to answer that question. The experiments she described are really going to be able to drive this project forward. I'm okay with that because I got lost. Yeah. But clearly the other people in the room did not.
Yeah.
So.
You had a few other questions?
I have a question about the previous comment. When you decide to release that information, is there a tactful way to do it so that it doesn't sound like an excuse?
Life, it's life. Yeah, I mean, I guess, that it's difficult, but I guess my approach has been, I think this is just everybody's personal approach to this is, what are you going to apologize for having children? I mean, people have children. Are you going to apologize for being sick or having elderly parents? And so I favor the approach of really kind of building it into your narrative. In other words, even though I have to face all these challenges, because I'll tell you one thing that you all know well, being an assistant professor, trying to get grants, usually having a young family in some cases, are really challenging. And so, you want to say, I've been successful even while doing all of these things. So, don't say it as an excuse. Just say, hey, I'm really excited that I've been able to do this, and I'm going to do great work when I come to your institution. And I've already faced these challenges. It's not that I'm going to get there and then have children. I'm like, wow, I didn't know, taking care of kids was so hard. And now I have to write a grant. Well, you're like, I already know that stuff because, So I favor just building it in. Don't be apologetic about it, and it's not an excuse, but just, that is your story.
Make it a positive. Yeah. The other thing you can do is ask your letter writers to mention these things, because often I've seen that in letters, so-and-so faced this problem with their family and they had to leave the country for 6 months, or, go back home to take care of parents or whatever, and yet they were engaged the whole time, writing papers, contributing, intellectually to the project. You can ask your letter writers to be certain to, include that kind of information in their letters, and then that really is a great place for this kind of stuff to come out.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the things that is a practice that I know some people think is odd, but this shouldn't be your mentor, your research mentor, but sometimes when you're asking other people to write letters, they'll ask you for a draft or even just some bullet points. And that's not because they don't want to do the work, it's because they want to be sure that they can help you in a way that, encompasses all the information that you might want to share but don't feel comfortable sharing yourself. Mm-hmm. And so that is an opportunity for you to say, yeah, thanks for asking. Here are some things that I think have been really important, like I was able to do this in spite of, having to deal with all these challenges. And then they can work that into their letter however they feel like or not. It's up to them, but you gave them that information. And especially for letter writers that aren't interacting with you every day, they would really welcome the opportunity to have that information to be able to help you in that way.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have time for a few more questions.
I have a really specific question. I've been married 6 years. My husband is a professor in Texas. We've never lived together. So now that I'm on the second job hunt, I was an assistant professor for 7 years. Submitted my letter of resignation and my tenure package at the same time. I was in Canada. Moved here to do a postdoc, but get on the same side of the border, so I'm kind of rebuilding. Now, as I start the job hunt, hopefully in Texas, where we could actually, do I put that in the cover letter? Do I showcase that, not the whole trajectory, but that, hey, if you hire me, I'm here to stay, because us finding 2 positions, since we teach exactly the same thing, is very unlikely. Do I showcase that in my cover letter, or do I wait and slip it into conversation if I get there for an interview? It's really specific.
But it's a good example of, what we're talking about earlier. What do you, I mean, life is hard. I guess it's kind of a personal decision. Mm-hmm. But I guess I would disclose at least some of it, especially
allude to it.
Yeah, especially showing why you took this unusual path. I think because other people, again, you don't want them to be guessing why. So anything unusual in your past, you just want to bring it out and explain. Otherwise, people are going to be guessing. That's what I would say.
And let them know that I'm a green card holder right away, as opposed to Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could just say, I have, here's my goal. I have done these things to get there. I'm now submitting these applications because this is my next step to reach my goal.
Okay, so that would be somewhere kind of entwined in the
I think in your cover letter.
Yeah, it has to be in your cover letter, because recall, so although again, it is always your personal choice, that actually the kinds of things you're talking about are going to be evident in your CV. Right, like where you've been and what you've done, because you asked what positions have you had. So, you know, in that sense, although you can choose not to talk about it, I think it's going to raise some really obvious, like, this was definitely a path that wasn't linear, and that's fine, but I think it's really great to, you know, to provide some context to it, and also to share your goals. To your point is well taken, are we going to hire this person just to have her then move on to somewhere else? Well, you know, in the cover letter, you can say, you know, my goal is to do this, and I am very committed to finding a place, you know, where I can both do great science and teaching and, you know, be in the same state as my partner.
Crazy goal.
Yeah, doesn't sound, yeah. So I think that, you know, especially in those cases where things are very, you know, there are gaps or, you know, other sort of unusual things in your CV, you should just get it right out there.
Thank you.
And the cover letter is a good place to do
Yeah.
that. You can really set your own narrative.
Yes, absolutely.
The chalk talk question. So can you describe the best chalk talk that you've seen in recent memory? What were the things that really stood out to you as like, this person gave a great?
Well, I would say Evan, and that's why I recommended it. Yeah, but I have seen some other ones, but I think they were characterized by, actually, you know, I don't remember if you wrote this one too, as a biological scholars candidate, but just really starting out with some very big picture questions that I think were helpful to engage everybody in the room. And then actually really kind of working through the logic and really pointing out kind of the gaps in our knowledge that this research was going to address. So even if you didn't understand all the details and it wasn't quite in your field, you could say, oh yeah, that seems like a really important question. I'm kind of surprised we don't know that. And, or this is kind of a really burning problem and right now we don't have a great way to solve it, but the person's like, yeah, I can do this. And, you know, to really engage people in, you know, shaping that conversation around these big problems. And then if people want to ask questions about the details, you answer the questions. But the candidates that I think were really good didn't force people into the weeds. They kind of let people ask. They just started out pretty big picture and just laying out a broad outline of their work and then going deep where people were interested.
One question that we kind of haven't covered that's on our list is if you could comment at all on if you have any experience in how chalk talks are evaluated at different types of institutions. So specifically differences in like more of an undergraduate institution versus like an R1 institution.
Well, I don't have any experience evaluating at any other institution but this one.
I don't either, although I know that in some cases, if you're interviewing at an institution that's more teaching intensive, especially ones that, you know, tend to focus more on undergraduate education, sometimes instead of a chalk talk, you'll be asked to actually give a short lecture on a certain subject. And so, you know, there I think the evaluation, again, is really more focused on how well you communicate. So that's true in both cases, but more the communication of the subject as opposed to just, you know, representing your research. So yeah, so I don't have specific information, but my sense is largely you're evaluating, is this person a great communicator? Are they a logical thinker? Can they engage well with their audience? So in that sense, my guess is that there's probably some similarities in how they're evaluated.
Yeah, I think the overall evaluation is still the same. You know, there's these 3 things that you're going to be evaluated on when you go up the tenure. So if it's a tenure track position, you're going to be evaluated on your scholarship, your teaching, and your service. So they're asking the same questions. Is this person going to be able to do this scholarship with, and maybe in this case, undergrads, right? Is the project good for undergrads? Are they going to be able to engage them and be realistic and hopefully bring them to meetings? And in all best cases, actually get publications with undergrads. Are they going to be able to teach our courses? And often this is undergrad courses, so really engage them and be clear and all that. And then are they going to be good, you know, at the service? So I think all that kind of stuff is the same. I have had postdocs who got jobs at small, primarily undergraduate colleges, and they did have to give a practice teaching talk. And so, but again, practice it. Find some undergrads, find some grad students who can pretend to be undergrads, you know, give a pretend lecture, and then get feedback from those people on how well it went.
Do we have any last questions on the chalk talk process?
Not the chalk talk process itself, but sort of slightly beyond that now, that we have so many recruitment going on in a prime institution like us, and this is sort of a comment, but it would be really nice to be able to not only attend different chalk talks in different departments, because these are closed door processes, but also let early career scientists in being actively involved as a chalk talk evaluator to get them more sort of experience in, get a first-hand experience of what's actually happening. Just like we have now early career reviewer pools by different journals. So I think that would really help.
That's a great suggestion. Here's what I'll suggest, because I have heard this suggestion before, and I agree with you, it would be really helpful. My sense is, and Kristen can comment if this is true in her department too, is that the chalk talk itself is best without a giant crowd. Like, you don't want like this many people in a chalk talk. It's just going to get really difficult. And that's one of the reasons why I think they're not just kind of open to everybody. It's not the desire to exclude people, it's the desire to have kind of a reasonable conversation and discussion. But I would say that all of you guys who are interested either, you know, in the job search process or thinking about it, go to your chair and just say, you know, at this point in my career it would really be helpful to me. You know, 1 or 2 extra people are not the issue. It's just making it open and having everybody come that I think is sort of less conducive to the kind of interaction that we want to have with the candidates. So I would encourage you to go to your chair and say, are there active searches, and could I request to be included in chalk talks if you think that's going to be okay. I hope chairs would accommodate that.
Yeah, my department, we had a search last year, and for each chalk talk, 2 postdocs were allowed to sign up. So again, you know, because you don't want to open it to all of them, you don't want to have like 10 postdocs and then like 6 faculty. So 2, they could each sign up for 1, and then that way everybody could get the experience, but we didn't completely overwhelm the chalk talk situation with a bunch of postdocs. So if your department is not doing a search, then, you know, maybe there's a sort of sister department or related, and you could approach, you know, the chair and ask, would it be possible for me to sit in on one?
In the last minute, if you guys could kind of like comment on what your take-home message is, or kind of, I guess, some key things that when you're serving on search committees and like sitting in on a chalk talk, what you really look for, and what you kind of, I guess, you know, like what you really want the audience to know as far as what search committees really look for in a chalk talk.
I mean, I think again, it's, you know, in terms of the chalk talk itself, it's being able to get people excited about the overall ideas and impact and of your work, and whether or not they understand the details is not that important. You really want them to understand the overall ideas, and that you have a clear path of what you're going to do for 5 years, and then sort of where it's going to lead beyond that. And then that you are a good communicator and a person that they're going to want to interact with based on the discussions you've been having in this kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as part of that, really thinking carefully when people ask you questions. It's, you know, don't think of questions as like, oh, gotcha, are they trying to, you know, are they trying to, you know, show me up? It's just, oh, that's really helpful that you're telling me something that, you know, I need to incorporate into my ideas. So, you know, can you tell me a little bit more about what you're asking? So really engage with people in the questions they're asking you. I mean, the best case scenario, these are the people that are going to review your manuscripts, your grants, and, you know, sort of take their questions, you know, really thoughtfully, and show yourself to be that kind of colleague that can take feedback, that can kind of really engage in good collaborative discussion.
Okay, well with that, let's thank our panelists for your great session.